portions represent.
Welcome back to Law News Network, everybody. I'm your host, Jesse Weber. Thanks for joining us. We are cutting out of that prior testimony in the Jessica Chambers case because we want to do a little bit of analysis about what's been happening in the last few days and what's been happening today in the Jessica Chambers case as we are in our morning recess. And to help me talk about that, I have with us a former federal prosecutor and criminal defense attorney, Stephen Mulroy. Stephen, great to have you here on the program.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Great. So I do want to start from this Eric or Derek situation. We keep hearing it. We're hearing an investigator talk about it today. From your experience, what does it mean to, you have suspects here, they said they interviewed every Eric and Derek that was in Panola County, but they ruled them out as suspects. They ruled them out even at one point today, one of the investigators said, we are 100% sure he had nothing to do with this. What does that mean for us listening to this and for jurors? It seems awfully presumptuous to say, okay, we take your word for it.
Right. Well, it's the best they can do under the circumstances. I mean, when you have the dying words of the victim, supposedly, if she did say that and, the testimony is accurate, that she named Derek or Eric, it creates a certain amount of doubt that has to be put out. I think the best the prosecution can do here is can show that they were reasonably diligent and they followed up every lead and it led nowhere, which meant that it was acceptable for them to turn back towards the defendant.
In other cases when it's easy to say, we investigated other people, this is the defendant is the one that really we believe did this. But here when you really do have the words of an Eric, this is, if you believe what the firefighters are saying and that they think that they heard an Eric or a Derek, is there any point, or maybe talk a little bit about, you can't just go up on the stand if you're the prosecution, I don't think you would want to do this, or maybe even the defense and say, okay, investigator so-and-so, did you investigate Eric with the last name, Derek with the last name? Again, you would be saying their names in court, but really try to rule out, why is it not this person, why is it not this person, why is it not this person, why do you believe it's Quentin Tellis? Again, you'd be mentioning their names in court. There is a problem there, but I would be curious because everybody that we speak to is having a problem with the Eric and Dereks, and I think they need to provide some clarity for the jurors at least.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I don't know what you can do in this situation except, as I said before, to show that they pursued diligently every other lead and then to emphasize whatever evidence they do have that links it to the defendant, which I think has been an issue all along, and which is why I think the cell phone ping testimony is going to be so crucial.
I want to talk about that. The prosecution's still putting on their case. We expect the cell phone evidence to come in either today or tomorrow. We have MBI agent, Mississippi Bureau of Investigations agent Tim Douglas, starting to talk about those cell phone records. It's initially what tipped investigators into looking at Quentin Tellis a little bit further, that he might have not been where he said he was, and he was in fact lying to investigators. So I do want to talk about that. What are the weaknesses in the state's case right now? Do you think it's the DNA evidence on the key, that it's not just Quentin Tellis? Is it the timeline of him running back and forth to get the gas? What do you think the problem is right now with the state's case?
I think both of those things you mentioned are weaknesses with the state's case. I mean, all along, they've been able to establish the how of the murder and how horrific it was, but the who has been the sticking point for them. And, the key evidence seems to be the cell phone testimony. That's going to be key. But as you've already pointed out, there's some evidence that might suggest reasonable doubt. The timeline, does it all really work out the way they suggest? And the DNA evidence. The idea that there are at least two other unidentified people that, have that DNA on the keys does suggest, well, is there somebody else unaccounted for that might be involved in this crime? And, the more the jury fixates on that, the more they're going to lead towards reasonable doubt.
I really enjoy when we have a guest that is both a prosecutor and a criminal defense attorney. We get a view from both sides. So I'm now going to ask you, as a defense attorney, what does the defense need to do? Do they just say, okay, go up? I mean, their opening was very short, okay, compared to the prosecution. It was like 10 minutes. They just focused on that Eric or Derek. They just go that way and hopefully get an acquittal, or do they need to do a little bit more?
I think they need to do a little bit more. In the opening, it's okay to just lead with that. But now that the jury's heard, or will have heard, at least some evidence that suggests that he was the culprit, they're going to have to directly rebut that evidence in their closing. And, we've already talked about some of it. They can poke holes in the prosecution's timeline. They can point to the other DNA evidence. They're going to have to do their best to discredit the cell phone testimony, to at least create some doubt as to whether it really is as accurate as the prosecution's experts are claiming, and then circle back, I think, to the Derek Eric testimony. And, you know, as we've said before, from the defense perspective, it only takes one reasonable doubt in the mind of one juror.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I'm feeling, I'm presuming here, but maybe the jurors are not 100% sold yet. The prosecution is still putting on their case, though. I do want to ask you about the idea of, you know, this idea of the damage to the vocal cord. You know what, Mr. Mulroy, I'm so sorry. We actually are going to have to go to live feed, but we do thank you so much for joining us here today, and we'll make sure to have you back on.
Absolutely. Take care now.
Thank you. So we do actually have our live feed in